In 1942, when Japan's armies swept through Southeast Asia, tens of thousands of Dutch and Indo-European soldiers of the KNIL, the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army, laid down their arms. Many became prisoners of war. Others were sent to forced labor camps across Asia. For 3 years, these men endured brutal conditions, working on railways, in mines, and in jungle camps with little food and constant abuse. But when the war ended in 1945, another bitter reality awaited them. While they had suffered in captivity, their wages, known as backpay, had been frozen. For years of imprisonment, successive Dutch governments did not pay out these salaries, nor did they recognize them as rightful wage claims. The scandal was born from a cold calculation. The Netherlands, devastated by the war and struggling to rebuild, argued it could not afford to pay KNIL salaries on top of reconstruction costs. Officials also claimed the Japanese occupation had broken responsibility for keeping accounts. Thousands of veterans returned home with empty pockets. For the men themselves, this was a betrayal. Many Indo-European families had relied on KNIL salaries. When those payments never came, widows and children were left behind. Former soldiers who had risked their lives for the Dutch crown found themselves treated as a burden rather than heroes. The injustice deepened during the Indonesian Revolution. As the Netherlands fought to reassert control, many former KNIL soldiers were called to serve again. Some were sent into combat while still waiting for their wages from Japanese captivity. For decades, veterans groups and Indo organizations campaigned for justice. They wrote petitions, held meetings, and lobbied politicians. Yet successive Dutch governments resisted, insisting the costs were too high, records too incomplete, and the issue too complex to resolve. The emotional toll was heavy. For many, it was not just about money, but about dignity. Backpay symbolized justice for years stolen by war. Without it, veterans felt their suffering was erased. Families spoke of fathers who carried bitterness to their graves, and of widows who struggled in silence. It was not until the late 20th century that the scandal gained wider attention. Journalists exposed the stories of veterans still living in poverty. Indo-Dutch organizations highlighted how the injustice had shaped an entire community. Slowly, public pressure grew, and the political silence cracked. Yet the government's response remained hesitant. In the 1990s and 2000s, limited compensation schemes were introduced. But these were framed as gestures of goodwill rather than full payment of wages owed. The amounts were small compared to decades of unpaid salaries, and many veterans had already passed away. In 2015, the Dutch government introduced the Backpay compensation scheme. This provided a one-time net payment of €25,000 on moral grounds, explicitly not as a wage claim. The scheme was administered by the SVB, tied to a reference date of August 15, 2015, and ended on December 31, 2017. For survivors, this was too little, too late. They had wanted acknowledgement, not charity. The refusal to label the payments as rightful salaries left the wound open. Historians and activists argue that the Backpay issue represents a deeper pattern, the marginalization of colonial soldiers and their descendants in Dutch memory and policy. Today, the scandal is remembered as one of the most painful legacies of the Indies. At annual commemorations, veterans and their families still speak of broken promises. Indo organizations continue to call for full recognition. For them, it is not just about money, but about justice. The Backpay scandal reminds us that war does not end with peace treaties. For those who served, the struggle continued long after the fighting stopped, in courtrooms, in parliaments, and in the silence of forgotten homes. Even in 2024, debates about widows and the strict reference date remained political issues. It is ultimately a story of betrayal and the fight for dignity.